I want to start by talking about the homework, which is the homework slash an issue I did yesterday, which isn't serious. If you look at the example I added from where I had the written out of the 4-step from the day's notes for yesterday, we are looking at this basically as a how many sample. Wait, what was the one we did yesterday? The Canada versus US? Mm-hmm. So we were basically looking at that one as how many different populations? 2. So where in our conditions should we have addressed 2 different populations? So the random part, I guess it depends on which one we're dealing with. Sometimes you have to deal with random separate, and sometimes you don't. The problem on the board is the one from our notes. And why did I not address that one as separate random samples? Because they're treatments and they're randomly assigned to the treatment. So one group is randomly assigned. That's kind of like the different populations. Now, yesterday with that one, your homework, were those selecting from 2 different populations? Yes. So I would make a note of this. This is not, I would expect none of you or almost none of you to have this correct because of what I did during class. So you should have randomly selected from both populations. So it should say, stated random sample of U.S. heart attack patients surviving a year and a separate random sample. So basically a random sample from Canada, U.S. heart attacks, and a separate random sample of U.S. heart attacks. The other place is, so is anything going to change with large sample size, knowing that we're doing 2 populations? No, because we already did it kind of in there. But the independent condition should have been for both. The one that we did is our notes. Each of the different groups was 24. So I could have written like lowercase n is 24 and then said that same capital N had to apply for each of the different ones. When it's assignment, it's kind of weird. It's basically saying we could have at least that many who could have gotten that treatment. If I had different sample sizes, I would have to say there could be at least this many who would have gotten the disopyramine, at least this many who had lithium, and at least this many who could have had placebo. But because all those were the same number, we said there are at least this many who could have been put in this group, or this group. Now the homework problem, how many total Canadians were sampled? That was the one that added weird, didn't it? Like something was wrong, like it told you had more? Because some of them. Yeah, because the actual was 311. Right. And it technically should have been 311, but, which I'll talk about. If you used 400, because that's what the book said, then you would have to say there are at least how many Canadian heart attack patients who have survived at least a year? At least 4,000. I think this problem might be those are the only ones who lasted a year. And that's why the numbers changed. But I don't have the problem in front of me right now. I'm okay with you going either one because I probably picked part of the problem out so you didn't have to write as much and left that part out. So then if you actually added the numbers for US, there was a total of 2,165. How many did it tell you there were? 2,600. So I don't care which totals you used for right now for the independent. Are you guys okay with understanding that independent works for both, even with the weird thing with the numbers? And I'll go over some more today. Yeah.
For state, would we still do like population, or would we have to do the?
So population still comes from, okay. So let me just go from the beginning from this problem. What is our population? So when I say, this is what we started to talk about yesterday, where there's technically like population and then subpopulations. Just our one overall population would be what or who? So it's the heart attack patients who had a heart attack and survived at least a year. And some of you are going to miss out on that detail of survived at least a year, and I would expect a lot of people to, but that's fine. So that's our population. It just so happens that our subpopulations are Canada and US. Does that make sense? And does that answer your question? Say that again.
Will we put Canada and US?
No. So just like using the example from yesterday in the notes, our population was chronic users of cocaine who wanted to break the habit. Our subpopulations were the dopamine, lithium, and placebo. We can still generalize one as an overall population because that's what our results would go to.
So whenever there's subpopulations, are we always going to do the independent
And
for both of them?
usually random. Yes. Does that answer your question? That's a good way to say it is. So you've got overall. So you might even want to in state write overall population if that helps. So that your random and your independent condition are you're thinking of as subpopulations. So then I'm just going to go ahead and read through most of this to see if we have any other issues. Null hypothesis, there is no difference in the distribution of quality of life for Canadian and US patients who survived a year after the heart attack. Alternative, there is a difference in the distribution of quality of life for Canadian and US patients who survived a year after a heart attack. It gives us an alpha of 0.01. Method is chi-square test for homogeneity. Stated random sample of US heart attack patients surviving a year and a separate random sample of Canadian heart attack patients surviving a year. Large sample size, all expected counts are at least 5. I'm not going to read through all of them, but your Canada much better number would be 77.3732. And I'm going to just read the very last one. The US much worse would be 73.4491. Again, I'll post this. So our independent, depending on which number you gave because it used different ones, there are at least either 3,110 Canadian heart attack patients who survived at least a year or 4,000. And then there are at least 21,650 US heart attack patients who survived at least a year or the 26,500, I think, if you use the book one. What's our degrees of freedom? 4. You should get a chi-square test statistic value of 11.7255, which should give you a p-value of 0.0195. And that is greater than alpha. So what for the conclusion? We failed to reject since the p-value is not less than alpha. We do not have convincing evidence that there is a difference in the distribution of quality of life for Canadian versus US patients who survived at least a year after a heart attack. Questions? I have this pulled up. I did not ask you to do part A, but this is part A. I did the distribution for both of these. This first category looks very similar. The second category looks very similar. Now this third one and this fourth one seem a little bit different. Maybe this last one may be a little bit different. We chose to fail to reject and say that there is no evidence that there's a difference. Do we see a little bit of a difference here? Yes. Why did we still fail to reject, do you think? What? Why? What did our problem set for us? What do we use to decide if we do or don't? Versus, and what was our alpha for this problem? 0.01, which is really small. If it was 0.05, would there have been a significant evidence? Yes. So like we can see a little bit. So if we had done it as 0.05, we would have overturned it. We did it as a very, very tiny alpha. So it's not significant enough at a 99%, but it would have been significant enough at 95%. Just kind of seeing that connection with what's actually going on and what we're actually trying to do here. Questions on that? And I think y'all can kind of see that without having to go through me making you make a graph and do all that. All right. I want to split video.